Welcome. My name is Caly-Sanchez, and I am the Associate Director of the Miami, Florida Jean Monnet Center of Excellence and European and Eurasian Studies program at Florida International University. I am pleased to welcome you today to this 7th Meet EU European Expert Career Panel, which is part of a 2-year grant which we at Florida International University, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and the University of Pittsburgh received from the European Commission. Every semester, we organize 2 panels with European business leaders, EU diplomats, EU executive director from non-profit organization, EU human resources directors, and others to better advise our students who want to work in a transatlantic workplace and how to be successful when working in EU-US relations. Today's panel is designed for students and alumni who want to work with or for European non-profit organizations in Europe, the United States, or other regions, but also for anyone who wants to learn about having a successful career in European non-profit organizations and the trends in the European markets. Before we begin, I would like to thank the European Commission and the delegation of the European Union to the United States for graciously funding this project, Getting to Know Europe, Meet EU, and our partners, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the University of Pittsburgh, and the Jean Monnet in the US networks. Our partners at Florida International University, the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs, the Career and Talent Development at SIPA. I would also like to thank our partner in the community, the European American Chambers of Commerce and the following Chambers of Commerce, the French, the Italian, the Germans, and I want sincerely to thank our 4 panelists for taking the time out of their busy schedule to join us today to advise our students. Today, we have a truly European panel with experts from France, Germany, Italy, and US, as well as a great moderator. And without further ado, I would like to introduce you to her, Renata Urban, cultural coach, language and communication skills trainer, urban training and services. Renata, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christine. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, our panelists and the participants. And we'll explore more about working in the European Union, working for nonprofit organizations. To do so, I'd like you to introduce you to our 4 panelists. They will spend a few minutes introducing themselves so that you can better understand what organizations they work for and what national or cultural background they have, what countries they have experience with. So we are going to hear a bit more about Annabelle, Nevio, Brandon, and Aaron in exactly that order. I'd like to start off with Annabelle. Would you please introduce yourself?
Bonjour. Hi, everyone. So my name is Annabelle Pottier. I am the Executive Director of the French American Chamber of Commerce in Florida and precisely in Miami. So to tell you a bit more about my own background, I actually am very new at that position. I started about maybe 6 months ago, but I've been working with and helping the French American Chamber of Commerce since the past, I think, 15 years. My background is, I think, was the perfect thing for that job, meaning that I came with a very corporate background. I was the Air France representative for many years. So I was the sales developer for South Florida, and I was a member of the Chamber of Commerce for many years, and then became a board of director, and just started a few months ago. So I think I've been in both sides of the chamber's side, meaning, you know, the customer side, and then on inside the operation of the chamber.
This is wonderful. Thank you very much for the introduction. Our students will most likely have a lot of questions for you about that. Thank you very much, Annabelle. I'd like to move on to Nevio. Would you please introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Nevio Boccanera from the Italian Chamber of Commerce in Miami. We are a non-profit organization, but we are also an official Italian Chamber of Commerce in the United States for the southeastern part of the United States. We are based also in Miami. We are part of a network of 80 Italian Chamber of Commerce in the main cities of the world, from Europe to Asia to, of course, America. We are partially funded by the Italian government, and but also the majority of our funds came from membership, from clients, from trade missions of Italian companies and small entrepreneurs that are willing to invest in Florida in particular, but not only in Florida. Also, we have let's say a group of Italian entrepreneurs and members that are based out of Atlanta, Georgia, and are part of our chamber. My experience is a long experience at the chamber because I've been here for 18 years, so a long time. I studied in Italy and also in Spain. I have a bachelor degree in political science, and then I studied international relations, a master degree in international relations in Madrid, in Spain. I work a little bit in Italy in a media company, and then I work also in Spain for a private company that is organizing trade shows and events and corporate events. So that's more or less my background, and thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So that shows our students what you're the expert for, what countries you've been involved in, if they have specifically any questions for you later on. Thank you very much, Nevio. I'd like to move on to Brandon. So Brandon, would you like to introduce yourself briefly to our audience?
Of course. Thank you very much for having me again, Christine. My name is Brandon Bohrn. I work as a project manager with the Europe's Future team at the Bertelsmann Stiftung. I'm currently based in Germany. I just moved here 2 weeks ago. The Bertelsmann Stiftung is one of the largest think tanks in Germany, attached to one of the largest publishing houses in the world. So that's the corporate side of the company, and we're the nonprofit arm. For the past 3 years, I was a project manager in our US office based in Washington, DC. And there I covered our German-American relations portfolio and other projects that are focused on promoting transatlantic relations, kind of going back to my early days of I guess the bachelor's degree. I got it in German studies. My focus is primarily related to Germany. Spent some time after college as a Fulbright scholar in Germany, English teaching assistant. I was in Bochum, Germany, and spent a couple internships with the US State Department there. I was at the consulate in Dusseldorf, and then spent a bit of time at the US Embassy in Berlin. I am actually a UNC grad, so I hope that there are indeed folks from UNC Chapel Hill on this call. I graduated from their Transatlantic Master's program. I spent 1 year at Chapel Hill, and then 1 year in Berlin at Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin. At which time I came back to Bertelsmann, specifically handling their portfolio. Some of the projects that we work on, we maintain very close ties with the German Foreign Ministry, the German Embassy in Washington. We are working on another big project called Transatlantic Trends. It's the foremost transatlantic public opinion survey that really is out there. We coincidentally just released this publication on Thursday last week. And I'll be sure to include a link in the chat for you all to take a look. Now that I've transitioned to the German side of the company, I'm still working on transatlantic relations and on US-German relations specifically. In the short term, I am working on building out this. We've never had it before. It's the inaugural US-German Futures Forum that we're organizing with the German Foreign Ministry and the US State Department. It will take place in early November on the sideline of the G7 ministerial that's taking place in Münster, Germany. So thank you very much. Looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Brandon. Super interesting. And I'm sure a lot of our students will have a lot of questions for you. So thank you for that introduction. And last but not least, I'd like to move on to Aaron. Would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Renata. And thank you, Christine and FIU for the invitation. Hello to my fellow panelists. So I will briefly walk through a little bit of my professional background because I think it touches on transatlantic relations from a nonprofit, corporate, and public sector perspective. And then I'm happy to, throughout the conversation, dig into specific areas of interest, as well as offer some resources for the students on this call that may be interested in fellowships, traineeships, internships, and so on. Currently I serve as the president of the board of directors for the World Affairs Council of Miami. I serve in that role after having, along with some partners, having founded the organization a little over a year ago here in Miami. The World Affairs Councils are a national network of nonprofits across the country. We are independent, nonpartisan nonprofits, and we focus on educating the public about international political, social, economic, contemporary topics. I came to that position by way of having moved back to South Florida, where I'm from a research position in Moscow, Russia, where I researched Russian foreign policy, the impact of sanctions, technology issues as part of the Alpha Fellowship program, which I'm happy to tell you all about. Unfortunately, it no longer exists, of course, so you can't apply to it, but happy to tell you about what it was like to be part of the last generation or so of Westerners that were invited at a very high level to be in Russia and to look into rather sensitive and difficult topics. I came to that position by way of working as a foreign policy specialist in Washington, D.C., where I worked for the main bank of Japan, Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi UFJ, also known as MUFG Bank. There I covered U.S. foreign policy, basically as a sort of internal political advisor and analyst for the bank. And so sort of halfway between the world of international relations and international finance, and working very closely with the diplomatic and think tank communities in Washington, as well as our offices abroad, and then U.S. and EU delegations and missions abroad. And I came to that role by way of Brussels, where I was working with the European institutions toward the end of my graduate studies, initially with the EU delegation in Washington, at the European Parliament Liaison Office there to the US Congress, and then with the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament in Brussels. And before that, I studied international affairs and international history and worked with different national and supranational legislative bodies and a few embassies to kind of accumulate different experiences and perspectives on international affairs from a variety of different national cultures and institutions and governance systems. So that's my way of comprehensively covering sort of my timeline. I'm happy to dig into any of those areas that may be of interest for the students here and offer more concretely tips on how to get involved and how to secure some cool opportunities for yourself. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Renata, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Very interesting, and yet another country and another areas of responsibility that is very interesting for our students. So by now, I hope you know who you want to ask what question. We have a very rich diversity of panelists here today for you. So we invite you to ask questions as we go, and I will keep an eye on the chat. So whenever we see a question from you, we will address it. You can either ask all of the panelists or a specific one, or also a question for me if you want to. So what I also wanted to do is briefly introduce my cultural, or let's say work history background that has to do with the European Union, if you have any questions for me as well. So I was born in Germany and I grew up in Germany and the UK. I lived and worked in several European countries, mainly Germany, UK, Italy, Switzerland. I've been a permanent resident of Florida for more than a decade. And my background is, I have a business, a linguist, and a training coaching background. And when moving to the US, I started my own business. So I'm the owner of Urban Training and Services, providing training, teaching, coaching services in that area that has to do with language, intercultural, and communication skills training. So that gives you an overview who we have here today at your service, and hopefully helping you with that decision-making process of finding an internship, a traineeship, maybe finding employment after studies, working in the European Union in one of those countries mentioned by our panelists. But as a starting point, I would like to focus more on our topic of non-profit organizations. Maybe a lot of you have thought of working for a corporate organization and are wondering, how is it different from working for a non-profit organization? There might be differences in organization in the mission vision statement, for example, of these organizations. It is often said that non-profit organizations are more closely connected with their passion, with their mission, the drive they serve, for they don't serve the shareholders as much as a corporate organization does. But maybe there are limited resources, maybe there are different structures. So I want to ask our panelists, what is your experience working for a non-profit organization? What should our students know if they're interested in working for a non-profit organization? Would anybody want to comment on that?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead, you can
Please go ahead. Please, Annabelle.
Okay, so I think for me, and I think it's very fresh in my mind. So like I was telling you, I came from a very strong corporate background for the past 20 years, and mainly for European companies as well. So for me, the big difference is it's going to be the fact that not just the resources, the fact that you have to be very creative and nimble in order to get your organization to thrive. And even though we said it's a non-for-profit, we still need to make a bit of profit to be able to hire people and to grow and to serve better our organization and to make sure that you can fulfill your mission. But I think one of the other thing was just to also realize that no matter the position that you have, you also have to answer to people. So the same way that in a regular corporate, you have to give answers to either your, on the corporate world, will be your shareholders, but on the non-for-profit, you have a board of directors. So there is also that, there is similarities in terms of the setup of the organization. To make sure there is some balance check done and that you're not making any mistakes or taking this organization in a direction that it shouldn't be. But for me, the big realization was to say that I didn't have much resources, money or people or staff, and I had to do as much as I could and bring without having those big budgets to get the same type of effect and same type of resources. So how do you do that? Is like you have to learn how to ask for and be creative and ask and try to get your either your members or your sponsors or donation. You have to be creative to create that wealth for your organization.
And that might be something a student, an intern might get involved in. That might certainly be something interesting for students. And I've actually found it quite interesting when Nevio said that he is turning his organization, the Italy American Chamber of Commerce, into a financially sustainable organization. Maybe you have some comments for us about that as well, Nevio.
Yes, I completely agree with Annabelle. Actually, in my opinion, there are not so many differences between a non-profit and a profit organization. I would say there are a few differences and they are very important nonetheless. So the first one is motivation. In my opinion, if you have let's say the call, if you feel the call, the vocation to work for a mission, it is very important. I try in the past to work with the profit organizations, and in the end, it makes difference. If you work for a mission or if you work for a shareholder and to bring a profit to the shareholder, this is something you have to consider, right? The other thing is, and I'm talking about specific about my work at the Italian Chamber of Commerce, of course, you have the possibility to work on different levels with different people on different industries. with different, let's say, key players from institutional players to private business players. So you have a wide range of, let's say, relationships that are very important and very fulfilling for your professional life and even personal life. While I was working for Informa Group, which is a big multinational company, we were 100 people working in Madrid in the office. You work in your specific task from A to B, and then you have other people working from B, from C to D, etc. So that's another difference. And it's not about me that is I'm the executive director, also about all the people that are working here at the chamber. We are a small staff of 8 people, so it's not a big staff, but everybody is involved on different things. So this is very important if you feel that you want to experiment from media relationship to trade missions, from trade shows to institutional relationships. That's the type of work that you have to look for, right? So it's, in my opinion, the difference are not very much, but are very important. And then, as you say, of course, as in any private company, you have to work for financial sustainability. You have to gather resources from the market, because in the end, yes, we receive a small, let's say 20% of our budget is coming from grants, but the rest, the 80% of the budget is coming from sponsorships, from clients, that are looking to our support for expanding their business in the United States. So in the end, we need to be very competitive, not only with other Chamber of Commerce, but also including the American Chamber of Commerce, the local American Chamber of Commerce, but also with consulting firms. So we need to work with a mindset that is very much in the market competition, let's say.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that insight that hopefully helps students better judge what the difference is between those two types of organizations, the corporate and the nonprofit. But there are also differences between working here in the US and abroad in Europe. So I'd like to focus on that topic as well. Maybe one of you would like to compare what it is to transition actually from working for a nonprofit organization in the US and then moving over to Europe. I think, Brandon, you've just made that experience. Would you like to tell us a little more about those differences?
Definitely. You know, it kind of depends on the organization. You know, each organization is different and has its own culture. But my experience has been, and it's also a little bit different in my case because I'm working for a company that I work for the US side of it. I'm working for the German side. We interacted quite a lot during my time in Washington anyway. So I knew a lot of the folks that I call colleagues today. But I would say that, you know, some of the biggest differences, especially, and this is a very technical detail here, is, you know, for those Americans who are looking to go to Europe, visa. You know, there's a lot of bureaucracy that comes with making that transition. When I ultimately got the job offer to move to Berlin, the visa process began, and it was quite intense. It was quite long, and still not over, even though I'm over here as of 2 weeks. So there's a little bit of bureaucracy that you wouldn't find in your country of origin. But you know, culturally, things are a little bit different. You know, I was working for, and I think, you know, Nevio mentioned this a little bit earlier. The U.S. side of the company is quite small. We were a company, you know, an office of 10 people in total, which meant that I would say that there's, you know, a certain agility that comes with having a smaller team. But then also, you know, you're quite familiar with your colleagues, and I think. Now that I've moved to the German side of the company, the office consists of over 300 employees. It's quite large. I mean, again, it's one of the largest think tanks in Germany. I would say it's a bit more structured. There's some cultural differences that are definitely noticeable even in just the last 2 weeks. A little more, you know, there's a greater hierarchy. sorts. But again, I would say that's maybe specific to my organization specifically. Yeah, but I would say that it's been a very, very easy transition for a lot of the folks that have spent time on both sides of the Atlantic. I think, you know, if you've done cultural exchanges, if you've spent a little bit of time abroad, the transition is not so difficult.
Great.
Thank you.
And we'll definitely look at those cultural differences also later on. But before we do that, I wanted to ask Aaron on his take of both things, the difference between a nonprofit and a corporate organization, because you're involved in both, and also the transition from working in the US and abroad. So what is your recommendation to the students, or how can they best prepare for that, or how can you compare the two types of organizations?
Thank you, Renata. Well, I think that the panelists answered, you know, a lot of that. But what I'll add is that I think what's important is not to be, when you're working with a nonprofit or for a nonprofit or running a nonprofit, one of the big differences, as the panelists mentioned, you still have to run it for profit in the sense that it needs to be financially sustainable. You know, you need to be able to pay your employees, you need to finance programs. So you do need to raise money. However, you're doing so with the ultimate goal of fulfilling your mission, not, you know, just stacking profit, right? So that's the main distinction. What I'd say is the unique aspect of working for a nonprofit is you can ask people for help, and they often want to help you, which is quite cool. In a corporate environment, it's just much more competitive for obvious reasons. In a nonprofit space, there is much more of a culture of collaboration. So, you know, you'll get also access to institutions, to venues, to universities where, you know, either, you know, for free or at very reduced rates because they want to support nonprofits. Companies may support you because it's part of their corporate social responsibility. Universities, because like FIU, because they want to work with the local, you know, nonprofit landscape. So when you're working for a nonprofit, you need to be creative in kind of assessing the landscape of your community and seeing it not as competitors or as just, you know, blank institutions that dot the landscape, but as, you know, possibilities for collaboration, for engagement, you know, potential venues that you can, you know, host events at. You know, if you know somebody or know of somebody in the community or even beyond your community who, you know, you may think fits your mission as far as a potential speaker, reach out to them. You know, don't be shy, don't be afraid. They may, you know, love the chance to speak about the topic that you're interested in. And so that's a little bit different than working for a company where you're much more focused on, you know, executing your corporate mission and function. And so I would encourage, you know, those that like creativity, aren't afraid to take risks and to ask questions and to ask for help and to ask for support, to look into the nonprofit space and maybe find something that is an environment in which they might be able to thrive. So that would be my assessment to that. Renata, did I answer the full scope of the question?
Perfect. And if the students have any questions on that, or it made them think of a question or it's something they want to know, please feel free and take to the chat and let us know, and then I'll relate the question to our panelists. But like Brandon earlier on mentioned, there are cultural differences, and I'd like to maybe explore some of those as well. And to give you an idea, let's see, when you were abroad or when you were transitioning between countries, especially from the US to Europe or vice versa, and you think of something like decision-making, leadership styles, the types of meetings and presentations, how it is done, but also intercultural communication, maybe direct versus indirect communication. What does spontaneously come to your mind that was different? If you could point out one or two things going from the US to one other country, what would be something that you would like to talk about, tell our students about something that really stands out for them to bear in mind?
For me, I think I'll join Brandon, but on the other side. So from what I remembered as working in France for corporations, and also now having to deal with a lot of French businessmen, I can tell you that I think things are a bit more formal at the office. in Europe, I think in general. I don't think it's just, you know, with France. I think it's really European. Aaron, I think you also touched about that, you know, that hierarchy, you know, and the fact that it is very, very important. So usually you stay and you have to really be respectful of that hierarchy. And so if you have to talk to someone, you stay really in that ladder of things. And I think there is a little bit less, you know, like you won't have really a job description in Europe. They expect you to really think outside the box and be creative and bring ideas. And you know, I think, you know, it sounds very cliche, but one of the things for us, I'm not sure if it's going to be like this in Germany for you, Brandon, but in France, you have to also, and working for a French company here is the same thing. You have to realize the cultural difference and not be shocked. In France, just saying hello in the morning is going to take a good 10 minutes, depending the size of your office, because everybody has to come and shake your hands, or you're gonna, you know, give a kiss to everyone, and that is very important. That sounds very shallow, but it is, and it's and the same thing at the end of the day. You cannot leave work if you haven't go directly to say goodbye to all of your coworkers. So there is some cultural differences, I think.
I'm sure that's not something Brandon has to do in his German office right now, but yeah. maybe you've noticed other differences. If you could pick one thing or one or two things, what is one main thing that you noticed in terms of a difference? And it's the same organization, and I find this interesting. Within the same organization, we transition from one country to another, but we instantly notice those cultural differences.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the U.S. office that we have consists completely of Americans. Our executive director is Dutch, but everyone else there is American. And then obviously the German side of the company is predominantly German. So there definitely are cultural differences. I think, I mean, one of the things that surprised me on my first day at work was getting flowers. There were flowers sitting on my desk, a bouquet of flowers, and, you know, sort of a note welcoming me, which I did not expect. I did not realize that was a tradition in, at least, I'm not sure if it was this company or in Germany specifically, but that was a nice gesture, of course. Like I said, I mean, there are certain draws of a small office versus a larger office. When you're a smaller office, naturally, you're going to have a lot more chemistry between your colleagues. You're going to have a lot more responsibility, a lot more overlap in the work that you're doing. And I would say that the U.S. office kind of feels, it felt like a family of sorts, you know, where you're, it was just that type of environment. And in Germany, it's just slightly more formal, you know. And then for those of you who spent time in Germany, there are even linguistic differences, you know. There's a formal way of speaking and an informal way of speaking, sitzen and duzen, you know, when to use what elements of the language, depending on who you're talking to. Now, these are little things that you have to also pay attention to, the language as well. So some cultural differences there.
No, that's absolutely true. And that's often confused when transitioning between an English-speaking country and, let's say, a French, an Italian, or a Spanish-speaking or German-speaking country, that you learn the language and you learn the difference between that formal and that informal approach. And when Europeans coming to the US, I think this is why they often experience our office culture as very légère, as very friendly and accommodating, because we are on a first name basis. Whereas in Germany, you would not have that. In the office, you would be on a last name basis, calling them Mr., Mrs. So-and-so, which puts a distance between people. It doesn't mean that they're unfriendlier, not at all. It's just a different way of communicating, which also needs some getting used to for a lot of people transitioning, not just between countries, but between languages. So are there any other cultural differences our other two panelists have noticed as transitioning between countries that you want to share?
Sure, I'm happy to offer a few comments. Well, maybe I'll look a bit beyond Europe, and since we're kind of focusing here on the transatlantic conversation, I think I'll echo Brandon, I guess, when saying that, like, anybody that's, you know, traveled a bit or done a cultural exchange between Europe and the US is going to notice that for all the differences, there's still relatively a lot in common between, you know, Europeans and Americans, especially if you take the conversation and perspective and widen it beyond, you know, let's say the West. So, you know, in Washington, D.C., I worked in this Japanese office, and we were the office was actually exactly half American, half Japanese, right down the line. Even the person in the middle was half Japanese, half American. So it was directly down the line, half American, half Japanese office. And it was very interesting. So, but the leadership, the head of the office was Japanese, and the culture of the office was very Japanese. And one of the things that I noticed was the degree of hierarchy and formality that made it a much more, I'd say, a structured and a more rigid work environment, but also made you kind of always sort of on your toes and really very effective and productive, because there was just a demand for higher productivity and a kind of expectation of performance. And so, you know, I don't know if it's for everyone necessarily, but I will say that I think in my experience, working at that time as an international political analyst, it made me better, I think. You know, it made my critical thinking sharper. It made me have to be prepared to, you know, not just submit, you know, half submitted works or anything like that. Not to say anyone else would do that, but nonetheless, there was this pressure really to perform and do well. And there are negatives, of course, to you know, over pressuring people, but to some degree, I found it actually very, very helpful in ensuring that you know, I was on top of my game. And I found transitioning to American offices much more relaxed, you know, and kind of up to the individual whether they would perform, right? So some were individuals and employees were high performers, and others perhaps less so. And it wasn't necessarily that immediately apparent who was who, and that would take a bit of more time. Whereas in that Japanese environment, it was just very evident because performance was so highly valued, I'd say. So that was very interesting experience and much different than the experiences I've had working between American and European offices, which I've done as well, but found those distinctions, while existent, you know, relatively minor, I think, which just goes to show our common values and common, you know, overlapping cultural spheres.
Yeah.
So I will add just one thing about Italy. Maybe it's different from United States, and for sure from other countries in the European Union, is lunch break. Lunch break is extremely important. It's part of the, let's say, what is happening in the office during the day. So is first of all, in Italy, usually is 90 minutes, let's say, the lunch break. Here in the United States, you see a lot of people that take half an hour, 40 minutes, and a very quick lunch break. And then, while in Italy, it is important that you go with all the co-workers or other people that are your colleagues to have lunch together. And usually many things happen during lunchtime, and is a kind of meeting point where you have brainstorming, you have an idea sharing. So it is important. It's part of the routine of your daily work. And also in Spain, it is very important. Everybody go together to have lunch, also in Spain. So.
Very good. Thank you very much for your observations and your experiences that you've made transitioning between countries. And this is something I would urge students to consider before you go. If you've never made that experience, prepare for it. And it is common that we notice when people do that they think what they do is right. And when I believe it's right, it's based on my values. It has to be the correct way of acting, speaking, behaving, and based on my beliefs, I do what I believe is true, and I act according to what I'm familiar with, my norms, my assumptions. These are familiar processes, thinking processes and behaviors. So I come from the best intentions when I go abroad, and I want the best results, but they fail. So why is that? Why do people still fail even though they do all that? And so what I'd like to share with you is a couple of steps that I recommend for anybody transitioning to another country. I call it the 5 steps of gaining into cultural competence. So step number 1 would be to get to know yourself. self-awareness. Who are you culturally, from your personality point of view, your preferences? Most people don't even know who they are. What do I prefer? Of course, I have to pick certain areas. In terms of my lunch break, how do I prefer it? In terms of greeting people in the office, how do I prefer it? In terms of meetings, decision makings, presentations, what is my personal preference? What is my cultural background? Get to know yourself. What would you expect? What is your normal? It's like fish in water. Fish don't see water, right? I mean, we don't recognize that until we explore it. So I urge you in step number 1 to become self-aware, to find that out. Number 2, get to know that other culture, get to know other people, other preferences, and do your gap analysis. What do you have in common? What is different? And then in the next step, you want to take some action and try to adjust. And you finally realize, and that's the most important step, that there are differences. It's just differences. Nothing is better or worse. Come to that conclusion, which will allow you the last step to actually grow, expand your comfort zone, and really develop that cultural competence over time. But it needs you to be willing to explore, to find out about yourself and others, about your own cultures and other cultures, about your own personality and others. So this is something I urge the students to do before they go. There's a wealth of information on the internet, or they could contact any of the experts present here today to help them with that. And another thing they need to bear in mind is that also the application process is different, not just the culture, the companies, the organizations, but the application process. So I'd like to explore that a little more. What are some differences in the application process? Let's say you see a very interesting internship and you want to apply for it. It's in France or in Italy, in Spain and Germany, somewhere in Europe or in Russia or other countries. What do you need to bear in mind? One thing that most US American students are or people in general, adults looking for full employment, are very confused about when they apply to a position in Germany is that on your resume, you're supposed to have a photograph, a very nice headshot. You need to put your date of birth, and it's very common to put your hobbies there, things you would totally avoid on a US American application. So this is just one example for Germany. Are there any other examples, anything you want to recommend to students if they apply in any of the countries that you have experience with?
I would say the same thing. Don't be shocked if you see that there is a request that you're really not familiar with. Or in France, I'm not sure if it's actually still current, but until a few years ago, you had to provide a picture at the same time when you were applying. So a picture of yourself and a lot of personal things, asking you if you are single, if you're married, if your age. About everything. Do you drive? Do you have a driver license? Or things like this. Because the laws and the employment laws in each country are very different. And in some countries, in France in particular, the labor laws are very strict for employers. So meaning that when an employer hires someone, they're usually kind of stuck with that employee for a very long time. It's an indefinite contract that you sign with a company. When here, and I can talk about Florida, here you're at will. When you start working with a company, you barely have any contracts. You know, it's on both sides. It's great. You can just shake your hands and say, it didn't work, and that's it. But in France, it's a bit more complicated. An employer cannot lay off someone that easily. So the background check and making sure that whole process of hiring is very heavy because of those laws.
Yeah, so one thing you need to bear in mind is expect questions that you wouldn't be asked in the US, and it's perfectly fine. So maybe that's one thing, takeaway, which applies to both Germany and France. Anything about the other countries that you represent?
I would say that in the case of Germany, it's quite similar. You know, you have the Lebenslauf, which is this, you know, the German resume, and it's typical that you put a photo on there. It's very, very similar to what Annabelle described. I think, one thing is when you're applying for a position in a foreign country, normally I mean, at least for the jobs that I've applied for, it's going to be in the language of that country specifically. So in some cases, what I found to be particularly helpful as a non-native speaker is to have my native speaker friends check my work. There's in some cases, the phrasing might be off, or you're not exactly getting across exactly what you're trying to say. So in some cases, teamwork makes the dream work. So try and get folks to look over your materials ahead of time as well, just to make sure that you're good to go.
Okay, great. Well, there's also cover letters and interviews in addition to resumes. So maybe you have a few more insights on other countries as well, the other panelists.
Sure, I could offer something here, and maybe what I'll do is I'll focus more on the EU a bit more broadly than any one country in particular, and really focusing on the EU institutions in Brussels, since we're speaking to students interested in international affairs. So one of the things, and I see in the chat there are some questions about internships abroad in Europe. This is going to be maybe specific more toward internships and less toward a full-time position. But I hope you'll find it helpful. One of the things that I took advantage of was that for internships, you don't necessarily need visas. So that's huge, right? Because that's by far the most complicated part of this, as Brandon mentioned, is getting your visa authorization, right? For internships, depending on the duration of them, it's very possible that you don't need them. And I'll give you an example of something that I took advantage of. So, there are formal internship programs with the European institutions, the European Parliament, the European Commission, and I certainly encourage you to apply to those. They're usually funded, and there are usually also specific positions and programs for non-Europeans, for Americans as well too. So don't be intimidated if you're not an EU citizen. There's actually a benefit to having Americans in that system, and it's an investment in you in the transatlantic relationship. So you can apply for those internships that are often funded, and they don't require a visa, and they may be between the US and Europe, or they may be in Europe, but for a duration that's underneath what would then require a visa, for example. Another thing you can do is you can apply to members of the European Parliament's direct offices. And so what you can do is you can contact, offices of MEPs, member of the European Parliament, that may be working on issues or topics that you're interested in, that you have a bit of background in, and say, I'd like to come and intern in your office. Do you have any opportunities? What can we do? And that, if you're accepted, and I did that a few times in different governments, that doesn't also require any type of visa or formal, program and application process. That's just between you and the member of parliament and their staff, and however they see fit and you see fit to come to an arrangement of what that experience could look like. So again, this is not instead of the advice that the panelists gave with regard to job applications and positions and visas. That is quite complicated, as Brandon mentioned. But since many of you are still students, or I think all of you are still students, you may still be looking also for internship experience, particularly abroad. And particularly in systems of power in national capitals or in Brussels. And so going directly and applying directly, may work. And so don't be intimidated. Don't think you need a visa automatically for that. In many cases, you don't.
If I may, I'm sorry, Nevio, please go ahead.
No, go ahead, no problem.
If I may, I couldn't agree more with Aaron there. I would say that, especially for Americans going abroad, it's helpful to get your foot in the door with organizations. If you're able to build your network in whatever city it is that you're studying in, and it's in the point that Aaron made about the European Parliament. It's actually the same thing in Germany as well. Typically, you can contact offices of the Bundestag and secure an internship in that way. If you're able to get your foot in the door with an internship, typically, you'll make contacts in that organization, and there's the probability that they'll want to keep you on board. So that is a great way to get your foot in the door of an organization that sort of sidesteps the initial visa issue that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, sure. I completely agree with you both. was about to tell the same thing. Take into account that in countries like Italy or Spain, for example, and all the Mediterranean Europe, you have a high unemployment rate. So it's different from the United States where there is no unemployment. So easily you have to work with your CV and sending CVs for several months before getting the possibility of an interview. So easily in Italy, maybe after you graduate, you are searching for a job for 1 year after you graduate. So it is not an easy work environment if you are looking to get your first job. So you have also to be prepared, and it's very common, especially in the private sector, to do like an unpaid internship. So that's also something you have to consider. It is very common that you stay 3 months, 6 months, not being paid, doing an internship in an organization or in a private company. It is more difficult. It is more difficult to get your job there.
Okay, thank you very much for those insights that you're sharing with the students. I'm looking at some questions that came in through the Q&A box that are related to language. One specifically for Brendan, but the person is saying anybody else could answer that, saying that transitioning from the US to Germany, how good is your German actually, Brendan, and did it help you? So somebody, for example, who's bilingual or who speaks another language at level B1, which is already very high, and it's considered the basic minimum that let's say the basic proficiency, the minimum you need to work in an office. Did it help you, or what are those language requirements? What would you tell the student?
Yeah, of course. Language is important in a lot of organizations, German organizations. It depends on the city that you go to. You know, Berlin is quite an international city, and there's a huge tech startup scene here as well, very international, and there are a lot of organizations that work predominantly in English. For my organization, which is a very traditional German organization, German is the main language of communication. Now, I will say, with that said, in the program that I'm working in specifically, I would say it's probably the most international of any of the programs that are at the Stiftung, and as a result, I have a colleague, for example, who's American. One of my direct supervisors is German American, and so in some cases, we do use a mix of it, and I enjoy that, to be honest. But yeah, German is absolutely important. Back in May of this year, when I had this interview process, it was 100% in German, presenting projects that I'm working on. I would say it was a high stress situation, and a lot was riding on my German not failing me, which sometimes it does. So, you know, luckily that went well. But yeah, so German's important, and you know, B1 level is quite high. So in a lot of organizations, I think you might be able to to get in. I think C1 is probably the level that you would want to shoot towards ultimately for some of the traditional German organizations, but that's very, very easy to do once you're in the culture, in the country, and are working in the language already.
Yeah, for those of you who are wondering what is B1, what is C1, and so on, so I just want to share what those language proficiency levels are. According to the Common European Framework of Language Proficiency Levels, there's actually 6 of them. There's A1 and A2, B1 and B2, and C1 and C2. So basically, they put language proficiency into 6 categories. A1 and A2 are considered basic skills, beginners skills, and it's already very hard for a lot of people to achieve A1 or A2 level in a foreign language. So if you're taking a foreign language at the university you're studying at, and you get through your German, French, Italian, Spanish 101 kind of course, maybe at the end of your studies you reach A1 or A2. That's still not the level they would expect from someone working there full time. I know from many countries, they require you to be a B1. And it's very hard to pass the B1 exam in a foreign language unless you've been studying and learning and being exposed to the language for years and years and years. Now, getting from a B1 to a B2 is extremely hard. I know very few people who've managed to do that in a lifetime. And to get to a C1 is almost impossible because a C2 is a native speaker. So these are the levels, and you want to consider that. So if you're really into language learning, and if you have acquired something like a B1 or B2 level of that foreign language, go for it. Nothing's stopping you. You can work in that country, in the local language. But if language learning is not your forte, if you maybe did a basic course, like an A1 course, so maybe you could get your groceries from the store, say hello and goodbye, and so you, like your neighbors and all that, that's great. But then you would specifically want to look for a job where the working language is English. So take this into consideration, and I hope that answered the question we had here about language proficiency. Another question, yes, go ahead.
I love one advice, because, you know, really depending the country, some countries are using English a little bit more than others. I can tell you that in France, it's actually not there yet. So mainly, you know, and culturally, I think it is very important to speak the local language. They would almost be offended to have someone who would just come with English and thinking that it is okay. My advice would be, if it's really a dream and you think language is still a little bit of a barrier, practice here. You know, come and work for those companies, those European companies here. Try to get, you know, if you cannot get your first internship over there abroad, you know, you can knock on one of the local association here and practice the language. I think this is already a good training and a good start to maybe a long-term goal.
Yeah, this is very good advice. Looking for a corporate or nonprofit organization in your home country so that you can get access to the language, to the culture. You've already studied the language, you know a little bit. You grow closer to it, you learn more, you're more exposed to it. And maybe from there, this is like a springboard to the actual country. That's actually very good advice. Thank you for that, Annabelle.
I have also an addition. I think Annabelle's advice is excellent. And one addition to that is also, in addition to the nonprofits and business associations, depending on where you live, if you live in Miami, for example, we have a massive diplomatic community as well too, right? So there are many consulates here, and some of them also take internships. Not all of them do, and sometimes this process is more centralized, but sometimes it's more localized as well too. So I would say that you can look at internships at local consulates, or if you're able to do some type of internship in Washington, D.C. for the summer, you know, the diplomatic community there, the foreign embassies are, you know, extensive in Washington, D.C., and they absolutely take American interns. And that's a fantastic way. I interned for the Embassy of Mexico in Washington, D.C. It was a phenomenal cultural and language experience. And I strongly recommend it. Additionally, I guess, since I'm speaking a bit about the European Parliament and institutions here, I'll note that well, language is always important, but a lot of the institutions operate across many languages, and it often benefits those offices to have a native English speaker as well too. Sometimes, you know, they don't have a perfect English speaker in the office, so you can also, by virtue of being an American, I understand we're talking to mostly American students, you can also bring English language expertise there. They may not need an additional German speaker or French speaker in that office. Of course, it definitely helps if you have some introductory or intermediate skills to help you fit into the office culture. But they could also harness your expertise as a native English speaker in a way that may help them when, for example, working on amendments for legislation that is kind of going around in all the different languages, right? So that's something also to think about too. That's maybe a bit more specific to the institutions, but nonetheless something that I would encourage people to consider. Yes.
That's excellent advice. Thank you very much. So obviously language skills, intercultural competence, these are very important elements before seeking employment or an internship abroad, also knowing about the application process, what is expected, what could they ask you. Beyond that, what are some traits you would expect from an intern in your organization, or what are things students can do while they're still studying to prepare themselves for that? Do you have any specific advice for them?
I'll say I'm actually in the interview process, so I can tell you what I'm.
Wonderful. Let us know.
Qualities and I'm searching for. I think Nevio mentioned it when he started to explain us, what was the difference for non-for-profit. I think having this sense of really understanding the mission, being passionate about the job that you're applying to. So being enthusiastic, show your enthusiasm, be creative. And I'll say for my part, for a non-for-profit, we have small means. We need people who are going to do several jobs. So it's not boring, like Nevio was mentioning. You will be asked to do many different things. So show that you can be that jack of all trades and be creative.
Okay.
I will add, of course, multitasking is very important, especially for a small organization, and especially for a chamber of commerce. That's the basic motivation, multitasking. You are in the middle of many things going on at the same time, many levels, many industries, many things, and so you have to be very careful on. Attentive to details. That's very important, especially with young people. Right now, I had a lot of interns during my career at the chamber, both Italians and Americans, and lately it's difficult to find really focused young interns because I don't know, maybe it's the cell phones or I don't know what, but it is difficult to find the person that is detail-oriented. And also another important thing is, in my opinion, is you have to be capable to write well. It doesn't mean that you don't know the language, but to write well an email, a document, a market research. It is important that you have those capability to express in written properly what you want to communicate, and it doesn't matter if you are of course if you're a native speaker is better, but it doesn't necessarily be the case, or in Italian or in English. Sometimes even with native speaker we have difficulties to find people that are able to express themselves well in a written document. It is very important, it's basic. And also another quality, I believe you have to be curious of understanding how the market is moving, how, for example, the member of the chamber, what are their needs, the trends in the economy. Sometimes we receive requests from companies, from potential clients of the chamber, and they ask us, oh, how does it work in United States distribution of my product, or the fashion distribution? So if you are curious and you are able to navigate a little bit the internet, you don't need to be an expert. Actually, you can find a lot of information on the internet. So you can, give that first answer to the company, and without a constant supervision from a senior employee. So it is very important that you put your curiosity at work, and you are willing to go a little bit deeper, right? So it is in my opinion one of the best quality.
Great. So I hope that answers some of the questions we had in the Q&A section about language skills and other skills and requirements. But talking about these positions, how to find positions, I think our panelists have also answered that very well. But we have one panelist, I think, who is actively looking for an intern. Isn't that true, Annabelle? Maybe you want to tell us a little more?
So I can, so like I was mentioning, I started just a few months ago the the French American Chamber. So I didn't even explain you really what is, because maybe some of you don't even understand what is the mission of a Chamber of Commerce. And the mission is really to foster the relationship between the two countries and be that connector. For me, it's like really the important thing is like being the connector between those who are in Europe and who want to come and open an office or start a new adventure, and those who are here. And all the locals that are here who are the experts of that industry, of that market, and being the connector between all of those. And so for the French American Chamber of Commerce, we were able to really survive the pandemic very well. We actually grew thanks to the digital and being a bit more nimble, but now is the time to reopen. There is a lot of requests, and I'm actually have a really, really tiny team. And if you have a team of 8, the French American Chamber of Commerce has no government subsidies, so we're completely a private US company, and right now you're looking at the only full-time person working for the chamber. I just started to hire and grow a team. So right now I'm looking for interns who would be excited to learn different things and multitask. So we have to do social media. We do a lot of events. We are back doing events in presence and with some of our partners here from other speakers today. So we have a lot of different job openings, from webmasters to, so I'm looking for someone who is excited to come and help me build back the French American Chamber of Commerce.
Okay, so maybe we can have some contact details in the chat. Maybe you can provide that, or Christine maybe can, so that the students who are interested in an internship at the French American Chamber of Commerce can find more information there or contact you on that website or directly by email. So if you could provide some information on that, that would be absolutely wonderful. All right, we're coming to the end of this session, so we just have a few more minutes. Let's see if there are any more questions we had. I've been looking through the Q&A box, and we had one new question here. A question for Erin and Brendan. It says, I've been learning German for some time now, and I would like to know where it is the best place to apply for internships, fellowships, and places where I can gain more experience with international relations, the German language, and would you have any, would I have to be fluent in the language for different types of opportunities? So maybe that's the last question we can take.
Yeah, sure. Happy to jump in here. Luckily, there are quite a lot of opportunities that are available in Germany in this regard. There are several different fellowships that you can apply for. Fulbright is one of them. I did that. Amazing program, would strongly recommend it. There's CBYX, which is a great program. I can also follow up with Christine afterwards and send some of these links. I can see also that Erin sent some in the chat as well. One of which is likely what I'll speak about next, and that is State Department internships. I think that's here, United States internships. Not sure if that's it, but State Department internships are also an opportunity. And in almost all of these cases, native or fluency in German is not necessary. There are several programs out there that would allow you to spend anywhere from 3 months to a year in Germany.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. And I hope the information that we've gathered today, that Christine can make that available to anybody who is interested in it. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your insights, your experiences, and some hopefully inspiring ideas for our students what to do. And well, our time is up, I'm afraid, so I'm handing it back to Christine for a couple of final remarks. And thank you very much for giving us your time and sharing your insights today. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. It was such a great panel today, and I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. It was really enjoyable, and I have enjoyed this panel a lot because you are great, you are motivated and passionate on what you do, and it makes a difference. Always remember, Renata will tell you, and our executive directors and our associations and organizations, you need to be motivated, you need to be passionate, you need to have language skills. This is everything what I wrote. Adaptability, multitask, motivation, enthusiasm. Everybody is looking for a talent. And I know that our students are there and they are really talented and be able to arrive to this level thanks to people like you. And thank you so much. I want to thank our sponsor, experts, and moderator for their expertise, advice, and passions, of course, and motivation that you have. Before we go, I would like to ask you to please fill out a brief survey that the European Commission has asked us to complete. So you will see on your screen at the present time a QR code here, so you can take a small picture with your smartphone, and otherwise it will be written on the page as well. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you at our next events. Please check our events on our website at the Miami, Florida Jean Monnet Center of Excellence. It is Miami, EUC. .fiu.edu, and on our social media as well. And our next MeetEU extracurricular panel will take place on November 9. So it will be in one month, same hour, same time, from 2 p.m. to 3:15 p.m. And it will be about the future of work in a transatlantic context, where we invited distinguished panelists from public health, science, environment, automation, artificial intelligence. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us, and I wish you a great day. Thank you.